Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. D.V. Prasad from Indira Gandhi National Tribal University, Amarkantak. Today we are going to discuss about the module Marriage, Migration and Other Changes from the paper Socio-Cultural Anthropology. So students, let us see what we are going to learn from this module. You shall learn about the social changes taking place in the social structure and institution of marriage in tribal communities. You are you shall have a clear understanding on the concept of acculturation with respect to the changes in marriage. In this context, acculturation refer to the impact of one culture on the other culture, and it will lead to changes in various aspects of the society. You shall have a definite learning relating to the migration and other changes induced in marriage for the tribal communities. And this module also aim to give a basic understanding to the students about the social changes taking place in marriage. It also attempts to provide an informative background about migration and its impact on institution of marriage. In spite of many affirmative action, tribals in India face insurmountable problems due to their low socio-economic conditions, poverty, migration, unemployment, displacement, indebtedness, and lack of opportunities. Accessibility and awareness of the government programs, these have greatly affected the social structure and institutions like marriage of the tribal communities. Coupled to this, the government and private industrial establishments have initiated mega projects of mining, hydroelectric industry, business, roads and transport, which is leading to the loss of traditional land ownership and livelihood opportunities. This is resulting in large scale migration of rural tribal to urban areas in search of livelihoods, either temporarily or on permanent basis, which in turn resulting into the disturbances in the traditional form of marriage and subsequent traditional socio-psychological, marital and family relationships and network of neighborly relationships and the adoption of new urban culture. Thus, human migration and in a particular tribal migration with its implication is becoming an important socio-economic problem for the policy makers and government to undertake welfare and development activities. And the tribal migration and marriage. As mentioned in the study, migration of tribal women, its socio-economic effects, an in-depth study of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh and Orissa, which is submitted to Planning Commission of India by Society for Regional Research and Analysis reveals the census data may not fully reflect seasonal or circulatory migration estimated to be up to 10 million by the National Commission on Rural Labor. And impact on marriage. Due to the trend of modernization in these tribal villages, the tribal perception, the thoughts, food habits, daily lifestyle and dresses and festivals, rules and rituals, the eco-friendly, nature-related culture, etc. are all deteriorating due to the impact of modernization. As modernization has entered tribal lifestyle, there is a chance to lose the traditions and tribal uniqueness in the long run. In the changing scenario, the tribal religious customs and traditions are clearly not easily definable as Islam and Buddhism or any other religion. A sociological interpretation of migration was given by Clifford Johnson, who wrote about the differential aspect of migration. Those who decide to take migration are largely the poor peasants and farm laborers who do not have enough resources for survival. A little better off families tended to satisfy themselves with whatever resources they have to work in the villages of their own origin. The economists who made a study of migration argue that migration is an economic problem as it brings economic imbalances. Land alienation also seems a significant factor in the process of migration of tribals from their hinterland. The marginal tribal families with smaller land holdings had to leave their native land and go in search of non agricultural occupations. Exploitation was another factor involved in the process of tribal migration. But during the study, no respondent has made a reference to this factor. A new trend of living together without marriage was for the first time observed during investigation. Robert Redfield's work on Yucatan in bracket 1941, it has largely been in terms of progressive disintegration. In quotes, the changes in culture that in Yucatan appear to go along with lessening isolation and homogeneity are seen to be chiefly three types. They are mainly number one, disorganization of the culture, number two, secularization, and number three, individualization, change and acculturation in the purview of marriage. Change is an undeniable, enduring fact of human life, if not of all living forms. Some change is pre programmed and determined by evolutionary and socio biological forces. The remaining portion is acquired through a multitude of circumstantial influences. The study of acquired and imposed change forms the bulk of research initiatives in the social and behavioral sciences. Cards 1974, for example, categorized change into four types. First and foremost one, individual change. It includes variations in personality. Second, incremental change, which is represented by gradual modifications in the structure of society. Number third, radical change, which involves the reorganization and reconstructing of social systems. Finally, cultural change, in which attitudes, beliefs, and behavior changes are major focus of interest. Acculturation has been used to better understand the modernization process that various culture and communities. More recently, acculturation became a important concept in the explanation of varied experiences of ethnic and cultural minorities as international migration, economic globalization, etc. Referring to the social institution of marriage, it can be highlighted the 1989 argument of Trimble. The response to the culture contact may depend on the person's situation. This phenomena can be called situational acculturation. Mendoza, 1984, suggested that an acculturating individual may reject religious practices, assimilates dress customs, and integrate food preferences, etc. Because female migration is believed to be primarily for the purpose of marriage. Other reasons for migration, such as employment or education, are not believed to be of importance. A distinguished feature of female compared to male migration, however, is the importance of marriage as a reason for migration. Marriage could be, as Pryor has praised it, an unavoidable correlate of migration as in India, where marriage migration involves the movement of the bride to the parental household of her spouse, dictated by the practice of village exogamy and group endogamy. Marriage could also be the end or goal of migration, as in West Africa, where the dissatisfaction of a young woman with marriage prospects in their rural villages has been suggested as a reason for migration, marital migration. Marriage could also be an alternative route to socio-economic status and social mobility marriage. As Prayer has noted, female migrants tended to return to their rural village if they neither marry nor obtain jobs in the city. Apart from the largely spatial type of migration involved in marriage migration, and aside from situations where traditionally the strict seclusion of women prevails, female migrants to the urban areas, irrespective of their marital status, are likely to be influenced by perceptions of urban rural differentials. The importance of marriage as a means of upward social mobility for women in both developed and developing societies has been generally acknowledged. It has been suggested that whereas males rely largely on occupational achievement for social mobility, for women, upward social mobility through personal attainment can be supplemented or substituted by the acquisition of social status through marriage. Implicit in these explanations of social mobility is an exchange theory of marriage that posits a marriage market not dissimilar to market in which economic goods and services are exchanged, in which females offer the characteristics sought after by males in exchange for the characteristics and status they desire from males. Implicit also is the idea that rational, status seeking considerations are not unimportant influences in the marital choice of females. Underlying assumptions which have not gone unchallenged. The marital mobility factor is thus particular to women and may be of special benefit to low status women who are at a competitive advantage over lower status men in the marriage market. For whereas high status males may generally not be reluctant to marry lower status females, the reverse high status females marrying low status males is less probable. Tribal migration and marriage. Seasonal migrants are usually scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and backward classes and other highly impoverished sections that go to work in harvesting seasons or in construction sites, in brick kilns, salt mines, etc. The important observations of migrations indicate that they tended to underestimate short term movements and thus underestimate seasonal or circular migration, which, according to recent village studies, account for the bulk of migration movement for work. Women's migration is not adequately captured because the surveys ask for only one reason for migration, which is stated as marriage, and the secondary reason finding work at the destination may not be mentioned. They do not capture migration streams that are illegal or border on legality, trafficking for work, various forms of child labor. The census of India reported 12.66 million working children, but estimates by agencies working against child labor calculate that there are roughly 25 to 30 million child workers in India. They do not capture adequately the movement of scheduled tribes and scheduled caste people, mainly because these groups are engaged in short term migration. They misrepresent the relationship between poverty and migration. While village studies show high levels of migration amongst the poor, official statistics show that migration is higher among better off groups because they cover mainly permanent migration, which has higher representation of people from more affluent and better educated backgrounds. Tribal society is largely egalitarian, and tribal women have been equal partners with tribal men in the contribution to household economy. Quite often, their women do more physical labor in their agricultural fields and forests than that of their tribal men. Tribal women have usually enjoyed a higher social status in their own communities than Indian women in general. Some of the tribes in sub Himalayan regions, like Khasi of Meghalaya, are matriarchal. As indicated earlier, the socio-economic profile of tribals, especially the tribal women, is quite low compared to tribal men and general population. This is also associated with poor nutritional and health status among the tribals. Tribals are engaged in various occupations like hunting, fishing, gathering of forest products, shifting cultivation to settled agriculture, rural crafts, and artisans. This somehow been engaged a change due to migration. A very few tribal groups are engaged in non-agricultural activities as mendicants, bards, pastoralists, leading a semi-nomadic to nomadic life. Migration for variety of reasons is age-old practice, but it is increasing at a faster pace over last decades. India as a nation has seen a high migration rate in recent years. According to the National Census for Population 2001 census stated that 307 millions were migrants. Of this, nearly one third had migrated during the previous decade. National Census and National Sample Survey used definitions of migration that are not employment related. These are the change in birthplace and change in last usual place of residence. Secondly, they give only the main reason for migration and thus miss secondary reasons which are often work related, particularly in the case of women. Third, they count migrant stocks and not flows, which are actually more important for policy. And finally, they seriously underestimate categories of work that employ migrant workers. There were 65.4 million female migrants and 38.8 million male migrants. However, a majority, that is 42.4 million of female migrants, had not migrated for work and had cited marriage as the main reason for the change in residence. Among males, the most important reason for migration was work or employment, cited by 12.3 million male migrants. Rural to rural migration still dominated and accounted for 53.3 million. Rural to urban migration 20.5 million. Urban to rural migration 6.2 million. And urban to urban migration 14.3 million. Interstate migration has grown by 53.6. The total number of interstate migrants were 42.3 million. Uttar Pradesh and Bihar were the two states with the largest net out migration. The number of migrants during the period 1991 to 2001 increased by about 22%. Apart from women migrating due to marriage, employment is the biggest reason for migration. Impact on marriage. Due to the trend of modernization in these tribal villages, the tribals' perceptions, thoughts, food habits, daily lifestyles, dresses, festivals, rituals, the eco-friendly, nature-related culture, etc., are all deteriorating due to the impact of modernization. As modernization has entered tribal lifestyle, there is a chance to lose the traditions and tribal uniqueness in the long run. In the changing scenario, tribal religious customs and traditions are clearly not easily definable as Islam and Buddhism or any other religion. At the same time, it is not so easy to distinguish between tribal culture and certain type of popular Hindu practices. Hinduism is, of course, not the only ideological force which has brought about fundamental changes in tribal cultures, as Christian missionaries have also been active in tribal areas, with the result that a majority of tribals have been converted to Christianity. The controversy here lies in how these indigenous people will merge with the homogeneous Indian society. The so called advanced Indian society, with its linguistic, religious, and caste division, which has been never uniform, and it has never been defined where these indigenous groups can be integrated. Even if to a greater extent, the tribals have forgotten their age old traditions like dance, music, songs, folktale, their own dialect, and many more traditions, the traditional cultural values, rules governing their society, like rules of marriage, which their children and their future generations should preserve their religious customs and traditions, or become modernized in every aspect, which would result in vanishing many of their traditional practices. It is a contradictory situation where modernization has brought along with it both positive and negative changes. All developmental programs should be implemented efficiently and effectively for successful progress. It is very important for a nation to preserve its culture and tradition for overall growth of the country. Impact of migration. As the impact of migration, it has been observed that large number of educated, uneducated, and illiterate tribal women from Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, and West Bengal migrate to different parts of the country, and metropolitan cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata are their major destinations for searching some gainful employment or casual labor in the unorganized sector and as household maids for their livelihood. They are often exploited physically and sexually. The above context, nature of varied data sets, regional and seasonal variation, different types and forms of migration like interstate, cross migration, circular migration, occupational migration, short term migration, and long term migration. And these type of migrations caused by displacement and gender migration, etc. Particularly among tribals and women tribal folks indicate that there is still a dearth of data and detailed analysis and probe is required to understand the tribal migration. The reasons for their exodus need to be studied in detail given the large number of developmental programs. Change in relationship with different family members was noticed in the tribal families having migrant women. Changes have been marked in the cultural process like various rituals, social institutions, social relationships, etc. Because of acculturations induced through migration, some bad impacts that have been reported are in the form of exploitations, adultery, contacting with sexually transmitted diseases, etc. The tribal migrant women of the three cities expressed that specific cases of exploitation by the person and agency. Landlord's exploitation is the major one, followed by placement agency at the place of work. The economic and physical abuse, sexual exploitation, separation from the spouse, etc. have been reported. So, students, let's summarize what we have learned in this module. We have discussed so far the migration and other changes in this module. From this, you have learned about how the change and acculturation had influenced the migration of rural and tribal women. And from this module, Kurt mentioned the following changes that are the main interest of migration. They are individual change, incremental change, radical change, and cultural change. The important observations of this module indicate the previous studies underestimates the short-term movements and thus underestimate or misevaluated the seasonal and circular migration which according to recent village studies which accounts for the bulk of migratory movement for work. Then women's migration is not adequately captured because the surveys ask for only one reason for marriage or migration, which is stated as marriage and secondary reason finding work at the destination may not be mentioned. They do not capture migration streams that are illegal or border on illegality, that is, trafficking for work and various forms of child labor. Tribals are being alienated from their land and forest due to the ongoing deforestation, hydroelectric power generation, industrial growth, and mining activities. The natural resources are being exploited in such a way which leads to the process of gradual displacement and denying the basic rights of livelihoods to the tribals. Historically, disadvantaged communities such as the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes are heavily represented in migration. The process of social mobility has given high status to the tribal migrants. The implementation of development schemes for the tribals by different government departments has created a favorable ground for the immobile tribal population to undertake out migration to big cities. Thank you.